Well, good morning, everyone. If you can get your seats, we'll go ahead and get started. For our prayer list, we want to keep Melissa in our prayers. She had her calf on Friday or Thursday. So she's in recovery. And then David Cornelius, we had a good update there. Where is he? Right here. So he's improved, but still needs prayers. We need to keep Jonathan and Angie and that family in our prayers. Not only do they have a move, but they had a big issue this week, so we want to keep them in our prayers. Who else do we want to add to the prayer list? Your sister, Catherine's sister, and her name is? Karen. What's going on with Karen? Okay.
I'm good now.
I guess you are.
Good, but I'm,
You're not sick. Okay? Other prayer requests? Okay, let's go to God in prayer and we'll begin our Bible class. Our Father in heaven, we're so grateful to you. We're grateful that we have this time in our week for the purpose of coming together to study your word. We pray, Father, that you open our minds, that you give us clear understanding of what your will is in our life, and that you help us to be more like your Son Jesus, that through study of your word, it will help to reveal to us the character and the attributes that we need to show as Christians. Father, we're mindful of those on our prayer list, especially those who are struggling with physical health issues. We ask you, Lord, to be with their doctors and caregivers, that they might prescribe the right course of action, and then they might be healed and return to our numbers. Be with those who are traveling this weekend for the holiday. Please grant them safety and bring them back to us. And be with those who are traveling this week and visiting with us. We pray that you would grant them safety as well as they travel home. Father, we pray for those who are struggling with spiritual issues. Lord, help us to be the hands and feet to minister to them and remind them of how important they are to you in this body of believers. Be with us this morning as we study your word. It's in your Son, Jesus Christ, holy and precious name. Amen. All right, let's see if I can get... All right, we'll leave the slides for now. Who remembers where we are? 1 Samuel, good. Now, what were we studying last week in 1 Samuel? So you have a man who is king. Who is king? Saul. Saul has now been appointed king. As Saul has just been announced or introduced to the people as king, we had this one group that kind of grumbled and said, who is Saul that he should be king? We'll not send him gifts. That's how that chapter ends. Thank you, Mike. And then we get the story from a particular city called Jabesh Gilead. What happens at Jabesh Gilead? We have an army that's going to come in, and he warns them. He says, hey, come out and submit to me, and I'll pluck out your right eye, or I'm going to destroy your city. And they say, give us 7 days. If nobody comes to our rescue, then we will do as you ask. We will come out, submit, and you can remove our right eye. Now, what do we remember about Gilead? What does Gilead mean? There is a balm in Gilead. We talked about that. But what does Gilead actually mean? Do you remember? It means a rocky place. And what does Jabesh mean? It means dry. So what does that tell us about the environment?
dry and rocky.
It's a dry, rocky place. It's an inhospitable place, but we know from our other studies that there are precious minerals or precious aromatics that come from this region. one of them being myrrh, and the other one is this balm of Gilead, which would have been a cousin to myrrh. And so it would have been very valuable, that's grown in this region, and therefore would have been something people would want to control. Good. So Saul hears this. What is Saul's response? What happens when he hears what's going to happen to the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead? All right, so the Spirit of the Lord falls upon him, and he cuts up an animal and sends it to the different parts of Israel, and he says, whoever doesn't respond to my call, the same or worse will be done to you. And then the Bible says, and the fear of the Lord falls upon the people. Now, when Saul sends it out, does he send it out as king under his own name? How does he send it out? Good. He puts it out as Saul and Samuel, which tells us something about Saul's state of mind. He doesn't feel like he's king in his own right, still kind of feels like he's in this vassal state, and Samuel is the senior member of the team. And he appeals to the people not on his authority, but on the authority of Saul and Samuel. Good. All right, so he sends out this call, and I think we ended pretty much right there, that they tell them that they're gonna come, and the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead said, hey, tomorrow if nobody shows up, we're going to come out and do as you ask us to do. Nobody's here, you can pluck out our right eye, and we will submit to you. Now, what do we know about the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead? What's the significance between that particular city and Saul? Why would Saul care? Remember in the book of Judges, there's this story told about the Benjamites who rape a concubine of a Levite. The other inhabitants of Israel see this as a great affront. They respond. They gather together. Nobody from Benjamin shows up, which implies that they don't care or they endorse what happens. And so the entire nation of Israel goes to war against Benjamin. It's a civil war. And remember, there's a 3-day battle. The first day, they don't do so well. Second day, the Israelites don't do so well. Third day, God says, go. They go, and 150,000 Benjamites are killed. And it says that they flee in such haste that not 2 people are left next to each other. So it is a rout in a biblical sense. And then the people of Israel gather and say, this battle is so great, so calamitous to Benjamin, we fear that they will cease to exist if we don't do something. Because none of our tribes are going to let our daughters marry the sons of Benjamin. We have to do something. And 2 groups of people are listed as providing wives to the city of Jabesh. You remember who they are? The Benjamites? One comes from the city of Jabesh, right? So they take the daughters from the city of Jabesh and they give them to the Benjamites. And then the second group is some of the Benjamites take matters into their own hand. They begin to kidnap women who are worshiping God in Shiloh. So the connection here with Jabesh is most Benjamites would descend from what city then? Jabesh, right? A lot of their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmothers hail from Jabesh Gilead. Why do you think Jabesh Gilead runs to Saul? He's king of Israel and he's a Benjamite. Good. This is the connection between these two, and it's probably why Saul is so incensed. He sees this as an affront not just to Israel, but to Benjamin specifically, and he's going to rally the troops. Okay, so in verse number 6, it says that the Spirit of God rushed upon Saul. You're going to see this interplay throughout the book of Samuel, that the Spirit of God, we saw the Spirit of God come on Saul one other time. When was it? That's right. When he was anointed but not announced, he went and ran into a bunch of priests who were coming down from worship or going up to worship, and he prophesied. And so the saying was at the time of the writing of Samuel that they would say, is Saul among the prophets? That was a common saying they would make because Saul prophesied. So 2 instances of the Spirit of God falling upon him, one after he is anointed and he prophesies, and the second time here where the Spirit of the Lord falls upon him. And then the response we find in verse 7 is what? Verse number 7 of chapter 11.
Let the oxen up.
Yeah, that's right. What was the people's response at the end of that verse?
The fear fell upon them.
The fear of who?
Fear of the Lord.
Good. The fear of the Lord. The Spirit falls upon Saul. Saul responds, "Come to me by my authority and Samuel's authority." And the response is, the fear of the Lord falls upon the people. So what provokes the response? Is it Saul's words? Not really. It's what? It's the fear of the Lord, right? That's what gets them to respond. So they show up because they feel like either I obey or I'm going to have a civil war. Saul's going to come and fight against us. And what's the one thing we remember about Benjamites? They are fighters, and they're renowned for their ability to fight wars. They are not people you want to square up against. So the Israelites say, look, it's better that we go fight with him, and that way we're not going against God, than if we not respond, and then we're going to have a civil war. So they respond. Verse number 12, 1 Samuel 11:12. Then the people said to Samuel, hold on, am I in the right place? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. So in verses 1 through 11, Saul then divides into 3 companies, and they go and rout the Ammonites. So it's a great victory for Saul. Is this a good thing that a new king has a huge military success? What was the primary reason the people said they wanted a king? That he may go out and fight our battles. There is a problem in Israel. Whose job is it to address that? It's the king. The king responds. He takes an army. He shows resolve. He shows humility, because when he calls them, he doesn't call them under his authority. He calls them under his and Samuel's, right? And he shows wisdom, right? So he's going to get all the people. He divides them into 3 companies, which shows that he's thinking strategically, not just going up there and routing them. And God blesses them. So they save the people of Jabesh. Now in verse number 1 Samuel 11, verse 12, remember back in chapter number 10, at the end of that, after they announced Samuel, there was a group of people who said, "Who is Saul that he should be our king? We'll send him no gifts." That's how that ends. And you think it's almost flyover verse until you get here. Somebody read verse 12.
Then the people said to Samuel, "Who is he that said, shall Saul reign over us? Bring them in, that we may put them to death."
Okay, so tying chapter 10's seemingly random statement that some said, "Who is Saul that he should reign over us? Will not send him gifts." And then you get to this verse. Now the people have completely flipped. Why didn't they give that response in chapter 10? What does that tell us about the state of the people then? Were they unanimous in their support for Saul? They asked for a king. They celebrated him as king. What was the attributes they recognized? He was tall and handsome. That's what they kept seeing. He's tall and handsome. Not running for Mr. Universe. He's running to be king. You'd think there'd be other attributes. But they say he's tall and handsome. He'll be a good king. There are some who apparently loudly complain, "Who is Saul?" There are people around him who hear this and they do what? Initially, nothing. When do they finally respond to that comment? There you go. Now they see Saul, and they see Saul as a king, and now they say, "Hey, you're picking on our guy. Let's go take care of business. You want to dissent? Saul's our king. Anyone who's not with us is against us. We're going to go take care of business." Now, as I've said from the very beginning, in Bible classes, especially when we're young, because we have limited time, we paint people into certain characters. Saul is always bad. David is always good. Is that true? No. We're going to see a good moment for Saul. Saul has the people on his side. Their passions are kindled. They see Saul as their guy, and now they're going to take matters into their own hands because Saul was insulted. Now, in ancient biblical times, insulting somebody was a bigger deal than it is today. Back then, it probably would have resulted in some type of blood feud. So Saul's insulted. Does Saul take matters into his own hand in chapter 10? Wisdom. He does not. Because he knows he is in a precarious situation. He's just starting out. He doesn't really have the unity of the people. He fights this war. Now he has the people with him. They're the ones saying, we should go take care of these people who disrespected Saul. In verse number 13, what does Saul say? Read it out.
But
But
Saul
Saul
said,
said,
not
not a man shall be put to death this day, for today the Lord has accomplished salvation in Israel.
Now, an immature, self-centered, egotistical monster that sometimes we make Saul into, what response would we expect from that type of a person? These people disrespected you. What would we expect?
Revenge.
He'd say, let's go. You should go take care of that, right? Instead, Saul shows maturity, he shows poise, and he shows humility. Instead of a civil war where they're killing each other for Saul's benefit, he recognizes this is not good, and he says, we're not going to kill anyone today. Why? Because the Lord has given us salvation today, right? Those two things should not go together. When 100 years from now, people in Israel are retelling this story, we want them to remember God delivering us. Not, well, God delivered us and then Saul annihilated us. Saul shows wisdom here. This is a good moment for Saul. This is probably one of the high moments for Saul as king. So he says, nope, we're not going to do that. Instead, verses 14 and 15. Somebody read that.
Then Samuel said to the people, "Come, let us go to Gilgal and renew the kingdom there." So all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. There they made sacrifices of peace offerings before the Lord, and there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly.
Now, isn't that interesting? Didn't in chapter 10 we already did the big introduction where God revealed by casting lots, they brought all the tribes. Then it was Benjamin and all the families. Then it was Saul, and Saul was hiding in a cart. They say, here he is over here. Isn't he tall and beautiful? We just had that moment. Why does Samuel say at this moment, let's go back and renew the kingdom? Why? Why does he do that? The people already acknowledged him as king. Why does Samuel feel the need to do this again? Was there unity the first time? The first time they did, was there unity? No, we had some who said, who is Saul, they should be king over us. Is there unity this time? Yes. Now, again, when we study the Old Testament was written with a different audience in mind, and this different audience would have understood the significance of a lot of things that are written. For us, it's almost flyover verses. He decides to go where? Gilgal. Last time, where'd they go? Who remembers? Nope. They were at Mizpah. What happened at Mizpah? Remember we talked about that song we sing, Here I Lift My Ebenezer? This is where Ebenezer was put up, right? It was this peace that was between Jacob and Laban. Remember, Laban was pursuing him, and he said, hey, we're not going to war anymore. There's going to be peace between us. And we talked about the significance of the events that occurred there and why Samuel would have chosen this. Why does Samuel choose Gilgal and not Mizpah again? Well, we're going to look at that. Somebody turn to Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 30. Because this is a significant piece of information. Samuel doesn't just pick some close area. Matter of fact, if we look at the map, we find that Gilgal is not close to where they're at. They're all up there in Jabesh Gilead. And then they decide to go down here to Gilgal. Why Gilgal? Of all the places, wouldn't any place be an acceptable location? Samuel says, no, we're going to go to Gilgal and we're going to renew the kingship. What happens in Gilgal? Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 30. Somebody read that.
Are they not on the other side of the Jordan toward the setting sun, in the land of the Canaanites, who dwell in the land opposite Gilgal, beside the terebinth tree of Moreh?
Okay, good. So at this particular time, the Israelites have not possessed the promised land. Moses is now deceased. Joshua is leading the people. They're on the other side of the Jordan. They're looking across the Jordan and they're saying, we should go across the Jordan. And the city they point to is what? Gilgal is their first place they plan to go when they get to the promised land. Now, turn over to Joshua chapter 4, verses 19 and 20. Joshua chapter 4, verses 19 and 20. Joshua chapter 4, verses 19 and 20. Somebody read that, please. This would be the out loud part.
On the 10th day of the first month, the people went up from the Jordan and camped at Gilgal on the eastern border of Jericho. And Joshua set up at Gilgal the 12 stones they had taken out of the Jordan.
Okay, so they are on one side of the river in Deuteronomy. They look across the Jordan River and they say, hey, we should go across the Jordan and our first stop should be Gilgal. We get to Joshua chapter 4, verses 19 and 20. They have now crossed the Jordan River, but what did we not cover? What significant, miraculous event occurs before they cross that river?
God dried up the water.
That's right, which is an important moment for Joshua, because one of the most significant miracles that happened under the leadership of Moses is the parting of the Red Sea. Now that Joshua's in his own right, God parts water again, this time under who? Joshua. They cross across the river Jordan on dry ground. As they're going across, God says that as you cross, each tribe is to pick up one stone, and then when you get to the other side, you're to create a memorial to remind you what the Lord has done. Where does this take place? In Gilgal. They had crossed from the non-promised land into the promised land. Huh. Why do you think Samuel might have chosen Gilgal? Just some city that he likes? Because he's going to remind them. Their minds are going to go back to, hey, what happened in Gilgal? Oh, look, there's this monument with 12 stones. I remember. God's the one who led us across. God's the one who delivers us in this land. Now, if we had time, we'd look at a lot of other verses, and we're going to kind of try and squish this in quickly. Turn to Joshua chapter 5, verse 9. Joshua 5, verse 9. Something else significant is said about Gilgal here. Joshua chapter 5, verse 9. Somebody read that.
And the Lord said to Joshua, this day I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. Therefore the name of this place is called Gilgal to this day.
Who gave the name?
The Lord.
And God said, I rolled away Egypt, and so now this place is going to be called Gilgal. Guess what Gilgal means in Hebrew? Wheel. What does a wheel do? It rolls. What did God say he did to Egypt? He rolled them away. Because once they crossed the promised land, that ends the chapter of slavery and wandering. They now are in the promised land. God has fulfilled his promise to the patriarchs. And he wants them to remember every time they say the name Gilgal, what? That's right, that God is the one who rolled away Egypt and brought them to this land. As they say the name, Samuel says, hey, we're going to meet in Gilgal and renew the kingdom. They hear will. They remember, oh yeah, God gave it that name, and he gave it that name because he's the one who saved us from Egypt. And oh yeah, when we get there, we're going to see this piled up 12 stones. How big the stones are, I don't know. But there would have been some type of stones there, and they would have said, I remember the story. God led them across the Jordan River on dry ground under the leadership of Joshua. Now, if we had a lot of time, we'd look in Joshua chapter 6. This is the base camp for almost all of the conquest of the promised land. In Joshua chapter 6, it's where they are based when they destroyed Jericho. You remember the great story about marching around the walls of Jericho? And who do they remember delivered the city of Jericho? Was it their own hand or God's hand? God's hand. He's the one who makes the walls fall outward. They literally walk over the walls and destroy the city. In Joshua chapter 7 and 8, we have the great story of the battle of Ai. So they'll remember that. They remember in chapter 9 what happens with the treaty of the Gibeonites. And then they remember this great story in chapter 10, the war against the 5 kings. You have the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, of Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon all go to war against against the Israelites. And in verses number 12 and 14, something spectacular and unprecedented happens. Who remembers? The sun stands still. Where were they camped when all this happened? Gilgal. Why does Samuel go to Gilgal? They're going to remember all of this amazing stuff God does. So the sun stands still in verses 12 and 14. And then when they fight the entire northern kings, that's in chapter 11. And then after they had conquered the promised land, then Joshua tends to settle there, because we find in Joshua chapter 14 verse 6, after the land has been conquered and they've divided it and everybody settled, that the people go to Joshua in Gilgal. When Samuel takes them to Gilgal to renew the kingship, they're going to be reminded of all of those things. Was it an accident that Joshua picked Gilgal? I don't think so. I think it was very intentional. And what's the purpose in going to Gilgal? To renew the kingship. Why do they have to go back a second time and renew the kingship? They already did it once. What happened the first time that's not going to happen the second time? There was dissenters, right? Who said, who is Saul that we should be king? We talked about this last time. Were they right? Should they have questioned Saul's attributes to be king? Yes, the only thing that people liked about Saul was he was tall and handsome. That was it. That's all we had. Matter of fact, when they were to introduce him as king, where was he at? Hiding. Like a scared little kid. That should have made anybody go, I don't think I'm in on this one. I think I'm going to throw the I don't vote that way card on this one. So they would have been right. But what was the problem? Why were they rebuked for this statement? Who made Saul king?
God.
That's right. God didn't want them to have a king, but he told Samuel to give him a king, remind them, warn them. We talked about that a few weeks ago, right? This is what he said. Remind them of all this stuff. If they still want a king, give them a king. And remember, God says, on this matter, I'm not going to hear any more of your cries. You've chosen, you made your choice, you're going to live with it, which means now I'm going to put my authority on it, and I'm going to make Saul king. And when I make Saul king, what's your responsibility?
To obey him.
That's it. It's over. The debate over whether we have a king or not, that's behind us. And the debate over who should be king, that's done too. Saul is your king. The expectation is you do what? Obey him. Because in disobeying Saul, you don't disobey Saul. Who do you disobey? God. That's why Samuel goes back to Gilgal. Last time there was dissenters. This time there are no dissenters. And Saul does something wonderful here. He shows a lot of wisdom and poise. He could have taken this moment to exact revenge against his enemies. He does not. He recognizes it's not his place, but God's place to deal with those things. He says, God saved us today, and that's what we're going to remember. They go to Gilgal. Samuel brings the people together, and they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. And there they sacrificed peace offerings before the Lord. Why peace offerings before the Lord? What is the need, the fact that they're offering peace offerings, what do they acknowledge at this moment with their relationship with God?
That they were wrong.
Against who?
God.
There you go. They recognize we as a people are accountable for all of our actions. If part of us is rebelling against God's anointed, then the sin lays on all of us unless we do something about it. So they go and they recognize and say, God, we get it now. This is our king. We're with you. We're going to make atonement to you. And now there's peace. Good. All right. So this is another interesting story that we're going to read about next. You got time. Good. So in 1 Samuel chapter 12, you're going to have this beautiful, very powerful speech by Samuel. What did they just finish doing in chapter 11? Acknowledging Saul as king, right? God's anointed. This is your choice, God. We're getting behind this guy. Now, in 1 Samuel chapter 12, starting verses 1. Let's read 1 through 5, somebody. 1 Samuel 12, 1 through 5.
Now Samuel said to all Israel, Indeed, I have heeded your voice and all that you said to me, and have made a king over you. And now here is the king walking before you, and I am old and gray-headed. And look, my sons are with you. I have walked before you from my childhood to this day. Here I am, witness against me before the Lord, who is anointed. Whose ox have I taken? Or whose donkey have I taken? Or whom have I cheated? Whom have I oppressed? Or from whose hand have I received any bribe with which to blind my eyes? I will restore it to you. And they said, You have not cheated us or oppressed us, nor have you taken anything from any man's hand. Then he said to them, The Lord is witness against you, and his anointed is witness this day, that you have not found anything in my hand. And they answered, He is witness.
This is a masterful speech that Samuel is going to give. He's at Gilgal, which reminds the people of all the great things that God has done, how he delivered on his promises to the people. They then recognize that Saul has been anointed by God. They recognize him as king and acknowledge their guilt before God and offer a peace offering. The next statement is, Behold, I have obeyed your voice and all that you've said to me and made a king over you. He's reminding them they have a king. Why? They wanted it, not God. This was not God's choice. This was your choice. You have a king. God's the one who picked the king. Now a king walks before you, and I am old and gray. Behold, my sons are with you, and I have walked before you from my youth until this day. Now remember, when they wanted a king, what did we learn about Samuel's sons? That's right. Everyone knew they were corrupt. They were bad dudes. They were stealing from God's offering. They were taking privileges with women who came to worship. They were not good guys. Same story we saw with Eli, right? Eli had bad sons. Eli was a good man, not very good father. His sons were corrupt. God eliminates Eli and moves everything to Samuel. So God's the one who took care of the Eli situation. They get to Samuel. Samuel has bad sons. Who should take care of Samuel's son situation? Should it be the people or God? God. God took care of Eli. He's going to take care of the Samuel situation. People don't. They want to take matters in their own hand. They say, Eli, your sons are horrible people. We don't want them to rule over us. But wait a minute. Who told you Samuel's sons would rule over you? Right? They just assumed, well, Samuel, your sons are going to rule like a hereditary, like a king. Did that happen with Eli? No. Samuel's not related to him at all. God then brings Samuel along. They complain about Samuel's sons. So then God says, okay, I'll relent. I'll give you a king. You wanted a king, I'll give you a king. It's not the direction I wanted to go, but I'll allow this to happen. I'm going to pick the guy. Samuel says, are my sons not before you? Why does he make that statement? What is he going to say next? The next thing he's going to say is, have I done anything wrong to you? Why does he, in one sentence, say, hey, my sons are here with you. Have I done anything wrong? Have I defrauded you? Have I cheated you in any way? Have I done anything unethical? Why do you think he mentions his sons before he makes the next statement?
It's a way to establish a standard for separation between his character and their character.
That's right. My behavior, who God endorsed, has always been above boards. My sons may not have been that way, and that certainly is not something he's defending in any way, shape, or form. He's saying you missed the point. It wasn't my sons. It was me. God was leading through me, and I did nothing wrong. And then he's going to make them say out loud, did I do anything wrong to you? Their response is, no, you didn't do anything wrong. Why do you think he wants to make this point now? Why does any of this matter? Saul's king, he should just disappear. Why does he take time to say, okay, it was me, not my sons you needed to worry about, and I didn't do anything wrong, right? You admit that. Why does he make them admit that now?
He was ready to depart, and he wanted to make sure that they understood that this process was God's process and not his personal wanting to do.
Good. And did they need a king to begin with? He's making them realize you never needed this. Remember, God says, warn them, and then if they say yes, they want a king, give them a king, because they didn't reject you, they rejected me. He's reminding them, your excuse for wanting a king was just that. You didn't need a king because I was corrupt. I wasn't corrupt, and you knew that. You even admit that now. I was not the problem. So he says, okay, nope, Lord is our witness. You have not done anything against us. Somebody read 6 through 10. Verses 6 through 10.
And Samuel said to the people, the Lord is witness, who appointed Moses and Aaron and brought your fathers up out of the land of Egypt. Now therefore stand still, that I may plead with you before the Lord concerning all the righteous deeds of the Lord that he performed for you and for your fathers. When Jacob went into Egypt and the Egyptians oppressed him, then your fathers cried out to the Lord, and the Lord sent Moses and Aaron, who brought your fathers out of Egypt and made them dwell in this place. But they forgot the Lord their God, and he sold them into the hand of Sisera, commander of the army of Hazor, and into the hand of the Philistines, and into the hand of the king of Moab. And they fought against them. And they cried out to the Lord and said, we have sinned because we have forsaken the Lord and have served the Baals and the Ashtaroth.
Yep.
But now deliver us out of the hand of our enemies, that we may serve you.
Go ahead and read to 12.
And the Lord sent Jerubbaal and Barak and Jephthah and Samuel, and delivered you out of the hand of your enemies on every side, and you lived in safety. And when you saw that Nahash, the king of the Ammonites, came against you, you said to me, no, but a king shall reign over us, when the Lord your God was your king.
Okay, this is a masterful speech. He just gets them to acknowledge God's anointed. This is the king. That's the end of it. We're all in this together. We're behind God's anointed. Then he says, okay, you see my sons here. You know who my sons are. They've been before you. I'm not here to defend them. Have I done anything wrong? God was working through me, not my sons. When you said you needed a king because my sons were corrupt, was it about my sons? No. God would have brought somebody along in his time and his way when he was ready, but you took that decision out of his hand. Now he's going to remind them of how many times this happens throughout their history. He says, remember, let's see, verse number 6. He brought your fathers out of the land of Egypt. Therefore stand still while I plead before you the Lord concerning all the righteous deeds the Lord has performed before your fathers. Jacob went into Egypt. The Egyptians oppressed them. Your fathers cried out. The Lord sent Moses and Aaron. What's the point?
God always takes care.
In his time, in his way, he's going to take care of it. You didn't want to wait on God. You wanted to fix this problem in your way, your time. This is on you. And we're going to make that point in verse number 13. And then after he brings them out, he says, and then he sold them into the hands of Sisera, the commander of the army of Hazor. Who is Sisera? Who is the army of Hazor, and why would we remember that? Because that's in Judges chapter 4, a famous story about a prophetess by the name of Deborah and her general named Barak. And remember, God then gets Deborah, and she says, okay, to Barak, go and do this thing. God is with you. And Barak says, I'm not going to let you come with me. And she says, okay, nobody's going to remember you, Barak. They're going to remember a woman. Now, we don't know if it's Deborah that she meant, or if it's the person who kills Sisera. Remember the tent peg? That's right, right? That's that whole story. So he reminds you of that story. And then he says, you fell into the hands of the Philistines. Again, the book of the Judges. Jephthah fought the Philistines. Samson fought the Philistines. And then in the hand of the king of Moab, that was Ehud, the prophet or the judge who fought the king of Moab in Judges chapter 3. What is the point? Why does he bring those stories up?
Remind them.
Who picked the people? Who picked the judges each time? God. He said, okay, now it's time to deal with this matter. I'm going to bring somebody up who's going to deliver you. Did you need to tell God there was a problem? Did you need to tell God that you needed somebody to lead you? Every time God was the one who said, it's time to deal with this, here's my person. And each time it was somebody different. And then he goes into verse number 10. And you cried out to the Lord and said, we have sinned because we've forsaken the Lord and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth. Now deliver us out of the hand of the enemies, that we may serve you. What was the point of that? Why did they get into trouble every time? Was it because God fell asleep? God wasn't paying attention? God didn't care?
He wanted to teach them a lesson.
You got into every one of your messes because you got yourself into the mess. And God, at the right time, delivered you in His own way by His own leaders. You did not do that this time. You looked around your borders and said, we're worried, we need somebody to fight our battles, we want a king. God warned you, said, I don't care, I want a king. So then he says, and the Lord sent Jerubbaal and Barak and Jephthah and Samuel and delivered you out of the hands of your enemies. Who is Jerubbaal? That's right, he's Gideon. They changed his name to Jerubbaal because what he does to his father's altar, remember, he has an altar to Baal and he tears it down. And so they call him let Baal contend, right? Let Baal fight his own battles. Okay, and then in verse number 12, who is Nahash? It's the thing they just dealt with Jabesh Gilead. Who was the guy who went against him? It was Nahash the Amorite. He walks them all the way from the very early days all the way up to the current situation. And then in verse number 13 or 12 is the point. He says, no, but a king shall reign over us. And then 13, what's the point? Now, behold, the king who you have chosen, for whom you have asked, behold, the Lord has set a king over you. When you remember this story, it wasn't God who wanted a king, you wanted a king. You got yourself in messes, God delivered you every time. God has been faithful every time. You, on the other hand, have been unfaithful. That's why you keep getting in these messes. Then you look at Samuel and you say, Samuel's sons are corrupt, we don't want Samuel's sons to rule. God's saying, I never planned on Samuel's sons ruling. When Samuel was old and it was time for somebody to step in, I would have taken care of that too. Just like I did through the time of the judges. Not good enough for you. You asked for a king, you got a king. Verse 14, if you will fear the Lord and serve Him and obey His voice and not rebel against the commandments of the Lord, and if both you and the king who reigns over you will follow the Lord your God, it will be well. But if you do not obey the voice of the Lord and rebel against the commandments of the Lord, and then the hand of the Lord will be against you and your king. Now therefore stand still and see this great thing that the Lord will do before your eyes. Now I know that's the second bell and we got to end. So for time's sake, this is a miracle that's going to happen. They're in the time of the harvest and Samuel calls a great thunderstorm. It must have been a just huge storm because it puts the fear of God into these people. So after he's done telling this great sermon and he's holding the mirror up and he's making them accountable for what's going to happen next, he then sends this great miracle to put an exclamation point on it so they never forget it. So someday when they're old and they're telling their grandkids, oh, I remember Samuel. Do you remember that storm? Oh my, I thought the world was coming to an end. What was the point of that? Oh, that was there's a reason why he does this now. It's to make a point. The torch is being passed from Samuel to who? To who? To Saul. Who chose Saul? God. But who chose the king? The people wanted the king. Yes, sir.
God's people like to complain.
I think all people like to complain, right? We spend our whole life trying to be Christ-like and not complain. So, lesson for us is what?
Don't let the same thing happen to us today.
In the Lord's time, in the Lord's way, the Lord will deliver us when He's ready and with the person that He wants. But when God anoints somebody, when God chooses somebody, what's our responsibility?
To obey them.
To obey them. Because in disobeying God's anointed, who do we disobey? So how does that apply? Who is our anointed today? Comes full circle on us, doesn't it? Okay, we're gonna stop here. We'll pick up here next week. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Well, there you are. How are you doing? You feeling okay?
Feeling better.
Well, good.
Not great.
Not great, but better?
But better.
Oh, well, that's great. Glad to hear that.